Yeah, so this happened back in 2016. Got an email from Tinder, and it was like, "You're the most swiped man on Tinder."
So just explain to us, for viewers who don't know, what is swiping? What does that mean on Tinder?
Yeah, so on Tinder, the app, if you swipe left, that means you don't like the person in front of you, and if you swipe to the right, that means you like that person.
So do you mind still being associated with that? It's a good thing.
Well, I mean, it made me who I am now, and I love sharing how I was successful, and now I'm like a dating expert. What's
your situation now? Are you with anyone? Are you still single?
So I'm seeing someone at the minute. Things are going well, and I'm a dating expert, so I'm always giving advice to people.
Does she know your title of most swiped?
Of course, who doesn't? It's quite hard. It's quite hard being the most swiped man on Tinder because you get a label on you. So I find it harder than anyone else, to be honest.
And where did you meet her? That's the big question.
At an event.
So not on Tinder?
Not on Tinder, ironically.
So for all that troubled online, there's actually a real life rendezvous. Which,
I mean, I have met people on Tinder in the past, and it has worked. Well, it didn't work, but yeah.
I need to know how to do the famous Stefan Smolder.
That camera is not a camera. That is your best friend, that's your lover. So you really smiles from the camera, so it goes like this.
GB News, the People's Channel.
A very good evening to you. It's just gone 7 o'clock. I'm Katie Bowen, and these are your latest headlines from the GB Newsroom. The King says he's greatly saddened by the sudden death of Alex Salmond, the former First Minister of Scotland. The Alba Party leader died yesterday afternoon, aged 69, from a suspected heart attack during a trip to North Macedonia. Mr Salmond had made a speech at the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy Forum and is understood to have collapsed at lunch in a crowded room. There will be a post-mortem examination to confirm the cause of death. Briefly to the Middle East now. Israeli military have said that one of its tanks entered a UN post in southern Lebanon while attempting to evacuate injured soldiers earlier today, adding that its actions pose no danger to the UN peacekeeping force. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has expressed his regret if any harm was done to UN personnel in Lebanon after 15 peacekeepers were injured in what the UN has called a shocking violation when Israeli tanks forcibly entered their base. Israel's UN envoy has also spoken a short time ago, saying it is incomprehensible that the UN is keeping Lebanon peacekeepers in the line of fire. It comes as the US has announced tonight that they will send an anti-missile system to Israel, along with troops to operate it. The Terminal High Altitude Area Defence is a type of battery that requires 95 troops to operate it, and it can be used to defend against different types of ballistic missiles. Jonathan Reynolds says it's not the government's position that P&O Ferries is a rogue operator, despite a press release earlier this week calling them a rogue employer. P&O Ferries' owner, DP World, will attend the International Investment Summit tomorrow. They'd previously threatened to pull out of the event and a £1 billion port investment after the Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, criticised their employment strategy and called for a boycott. The operator was criticised by politicians from both main parties in March 2022, when it suddenly sacked 800 British seafarers and replaced them with cheaper, mainly overseas staff, saying it was necessary to stave off bankruptcy. The business secretary told GB News' Camilla Tominey that the £1 billion investment will go ahead.
Quickly on this issue, that's not the government's position. The issue, obviously, with P&O Ferries is we're not going to recoil from that. We thought it was wrong, the fire and rehire that we saw, those workers being sacked and then taken back on fewer terms and conditions. But we have changed the law. It was lawful under the Conservative government. It will be unlawful under this Labour government. So where companies accept that, acknowledge that, can work within that framework, we'll, of course, talk to them about investments. And I can tell you they're coming to the summit and the investment will go ahead.
Finally, to the sporting world, England have won 3-1 in their Nations League clash against Finland. Jack Grealish put the Three Lions ahead in the 18th minute before Trent Alexander-Arnold and Declan Rice extended their lead. Finland got one back in the 87th minute. Those are your latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Katie Bowen. More from me in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Suella Braverman is cancelled at Cambridge, Vodafone issues guidelines on gender identity, and insects are unleashed at the LGB Alliance conference. This is Free Speech Nation. Welcome to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. This is the show where we take a look at culture, current affairs and politics. And, of course, we'll have the latest from all those lovable culture warriors who have been unleashing insects this week. We'll get to that in just a moment. But coming up, I'm going to be talking to the author of a new book that documents the hounding from protesters over her pro-women's rights views. And the organisation which had its conference disrupted by thousands of crickets will be joining me tonight. And also an author found guilty of spreading pro-Nazi propaganda gives his defence. And, of course, myself and my fantastic panel will be answering questions from this wonderful studio audience. And my comedian guests this evening are Nick Dixon and Cressida Wetton.
That's told to clap.
They almost didn't applaud you, and that's a real snub.
They've seen what I do.
They have seen what you do.
No claps for Nick.
And I think that's fair enough.
Although I was shocked they didn't clap Cressida, though.
But you're a menace, so, you know...
I understood
you just
that.
spent the last 5 minutes telling everyone you hate change, so maybe they were trying to keep things...
Yes.
Yeah, I haven't done it since we're in the new studio, in the big posh desk.
Isn't it? It's posh
I'm
and
miles
nice.
away from you. I feel like we're on one of those American shows where we're going to clash about something.
Well, maybe we will. Maybe we will, Nick. That's a lot to look forward to. But let's first get some questions from the audience. Our first question is from Jem. Jem, hello.
Hi. Is free speech in crisis?
Well, I mean, that's a big question. Could you be more specific, Jem?
Well, I'm thinking of Suella Braverman's event that was cancelled in Cambridge.
Ah, OK. Well, and this was... well, one of the many examples of this kind of thing. And the reason it got cancelled with Suella Braverman was because the police said it was unsafe. It would be unsafe because there were pro-Palestine protesters. And this is the technique that they always use. It's about safety.
It's all about
we have
safety,
to cancel
Andrew.
it.
Got to be safe. I don't know if people's education and university experience is safe, but don't worry about that.
Yeah.
As long as they don't hear anything they don't disagree with.
Yeah, so why has this happened in this case, do you think? Why Suella Braverman particularly?
Well, she's got a bit of a reputation for having views that are seen as far right. That's not my opinion.
Yes. Well, no, it makes no sense, does it? Because if you disagree with her views, what you can do at these events, as I understand it, is turn up and in the Q&A bit, you can express why you
Far
disagree.
too radical.
Is that too radical?
No, it's much better to assume you know what she's going to say and leaflet everybody so they don't come.
Yeah, I mean, we've had all sorts of things like this. I mean, do you remember those activists in Cardiff trying to put a stop to the Germaine Greer talk because they were claiming she was a transphobe, even though she wasn't even talking about trans issues on the night? But this thing about safety, it winds me up, Nick.
Well, yeah, I mean, you've done a whole show about it for 3 years.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so, yeah, you're getting the theme.
Yeah, because he asked, you know, is free speech under threat? It's like, duh, Free Speech Nation. But, yeah, I mean, it's just another classic example, isn't it? But the question is, would it have happened without this bill being blocked by Bridget Phillipson? Suella Braverman suggested this would have been solved by that, which would have allowed universities, well, insisted universities defend freedom of speech, but Labour blocked that, which implies Labour love this kind of thing. This is great for them. If they can just shut down their enemies, this is perfect for them. They don't mind that it's like eroding our, you know, discourse or something like that.
Well, let's fill in people if they don't know. So what happened was there was a cross-party agreement on a new higher education freedom of speech bill. It was agreed by both parties. It was debated endlessly for years. This thing people have been working on this for almost 5 years. Then Labour get in, and the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, just scotches it the night before Parliament is due to go into recess, which means that there couldn't be a debate in Parliament about this act of political vandalism. It's absolutely mad, isn't it?
It's quite ironic.
I don't think Labour do irony, do they? I mean, but it does suggest, this in tandem with the draconian jail terms for people posting offensive memes, the fact that Labour wants to revamp the Online Safety Act, the fact that they've pledged to increase so-called hate speech laws. Are we just dealing with an authoritarian government at this point?
Well, yes, I think we are. And also, weirdly, authoritarian students. Where's the rebellion?
I know.
Why aren't 19-year-olds trying to be outrageous instead of calling for more safety? That's so upsetting.
Were you an outrageous 19-year-old now?
I think students have always been stupid and very far left, but we haven't always emboldened them to this degree. You know what I mean? They said things, we went, OK, that's very nice, you'll grow up soon and realise how the world works. But now they seem to run things.
stupid and far left. Bit of a generalisation.
I'm including myself. I was stupid. I was stupid. Yeah.
Sure.
I don't mean stupid intellectually. I mean they don't know anything about life. But it's almost a tautology.
How could you?
Then
Exactly.
they're young.
Yeah. No. Fair enough. OK. Well, let's move on to a question from Peter. Peter. Hello.
Hello. Hillary Clinton wants to repeal Section 230.
Yes.
Is that good or bad?
So, yeah, I mean, some people might not know what Section 230 is, but this is part of the Communications Decency Act, which was put in by the US government. The idea being that if you run a social media website, you're going to get lots of comments and you're going to get people using the platform to express potentially libelous things, potentially criminal things. And the idea is that the Section 230 protects the platforms, the big tech companies, from being sued or being even prosecuted for the content that appears on their site. So actually that's quite an important protection. The problem is that if, as Hillary Clinton says, we get rid of Section 230, the social media sites are going to be gung-ho for censorship. They won't take the risk. They'll be like, let's just censor everything just to make sure that we don't get sued and we don't get prosecuted. I mean, isn't that really what's going on here?
Well, what I think is going on, it's a little bit complicated, but basically, when Twitter was banning conservatives were worried about, they were talking about Section 230.
Yes.
Because they were saying, you shouldn't just be able to ban us. And it looked as if Twitter were behaving like a publisher. And banning Donald Trump would be the zenith of this. I mean, it's completely absurd. So you look at it and say, OK, you've banned all these people, you've banned Trump, we have to look at that law because you're behaving like a publisher. But now we're hearing it from Hillary Clinton. Why? Because Elon Musk runs X and it's not going her way anymore.
Quite.
It's that simple. What's not so simple is people might say, well, now Musk runs it, so now it's just going to, the Conservatives are winning. But I think he's been a lot more fair. There's this Ken Klippenstein thing recently where he's doxed J.D. Vance in Musk's opinion, so he's banned Klippenstein. Apart from that, I can't really think of many examples of Musk banning people on the left, whereas he's not banned Biden, for example. So I think he's been a lot more fair.
Well, he's actually brought back a lot of extreme left-wing accounts.
Right.
Because he's, he has a certain degree of fealty to the notion of free speech, irrespective of whether he agrees or not. That wasn't the case, was it, Cressida, with the previous regime, where people were banned for saying that people can't change sex, for instance. They were banned for violating the ideological principles of that coterie who worked at Twitter.
Yes, and who's making that decision? A very small number of people. This always comes back to the same thing, doesn't it? Who's making the decisions?
Right.
And it seems like the maximum good you can do is to have everybody free to make their arguments rather than have it restricted by specific people with specific agendas.
And what about Nick's point that Hillary Clinton wasn't bleating about this when the old regime were in charge at Twitter?
Very good point, Nick.
I mean, it's quite clear, isn't it, what's going on here?
It's very clear. She's using the language of harm, we need to protect young people and so on. But it's so clear she wants the other side censored. And some of them may want her censored, but if you look at Musk objectively, he's done far less of it than the old Twitter regime.
Yeah, I'm really worried about all these mainstream politicians sort of coming out openly now against free speech. Because we've had Hillary Clinton, we had John Kerry, the former Secretary of State, saying last week at the World Economic Forum that he thought that the First Amendment was a major block to their efforts to prevent disinformation. A major block, right? And this is happening more and more.
It's right at the front, which is annoying. It's number one. It's blocking him.
It's the First Amendment. It's the one you see straight away. And now he, presumably, wants to amend the First Amendment. And I worry about that because it used to be crazy activists who used to say this. About 5-6 years ago, there were quite a lot of them. There were people like Richard Delgado and the critical race theorists saying we should need to get rid of the First Amendment or at least change it so that we can criminalise certain speech. But now people like Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, I mean, is it just becoming more mainstream, this idea that free speech is a bad thing?
Yeah, I think it is. I think if you talk about free speech, when I was a kid, that was this kind of thing that was just... I don't even at primary school, it was just, oh, everybody likes free speech, that's a good thing.
You went to a very progressive primary school. I went to a convent school. They didn't believe in free speech at all. They would whack you in the head with a slipper if you tried to say something that they didn't like.
Look how you turned out, Andrew.
I turned out very well, thank you.
Well, it's very... Now, if you say that you're a free speech absolutist, you're seen as some sort of extremist by certain people. You think, if you listen to what I just said...
Have you heard the phrase free speech extremist? People are now using that. Or First Amendment absolutism. But I mean, that's crazy.
One critique you could make, though, is that the Constitution is clearly not protecting freedom of speech. You know, there is an argument that the Constitution was brought in... By the time you bring in a written constitution, you've already failed because you're having to put things into writing that should just be organic in the culture. So you look at, for example, COVID and the lockdowns and so on, or many other examples. Are you really free in America to criticise the regime or to say something that's, you know, not in line with wokeness? You really don't have free speech anyway.
No, that's true. But it's an effort, isn't it? Writing it down, it's an effort. It's a way to say, look, humankind is fallible. Here's some rules that we can all agree on, some basic premises.
Yeah, I'd still rather not have Kerry saying we need to look at this First Amendment again.
No, I know.
I'm just saying it's not perfect, but it's better than what they want to do.
I mean, that is troubling, I would say. Anyway, we've got another question from... This came in via email. Who was it who said this? There's no name on this, so I'm just going to read the question now. Should praying at home be made illegal if it upsets people? Let's call this person Pamela, because there aren't enough Pamelas in the world. Thanks for your question, Pamela. Next time, sign your emails. What do you think of this, Cressida? You know what this is about. There's been this new Scottish law. Can you give us the background?
So the idea is that women going for abortion services might have protesters in their way, upsetting them, and so this gives, I think it's 150...
It's a buffer zone.
A buffer zone of 150 metres. You can't do any aggressive or otherwise praying in that area.
Aggressive praying?
Well, I shouldn't have said that, should I? I should have said
swinging your rosary beads around the place.
Any intentional anti-abortion praying, you're not allowed to do that. So that's one thing, and Nick will debate you about that all day. But what's now happened is they've noticed, well, sometimes people live inside that buffer zone. Your house, Nick might move into a house right next to an abortion clinic and put something in his window saying, I love all life and leave it alone, or something like that, refer to specific Bible passages. And, of course, that's now going to be interpreted as attacking these women.
She's been to my house. She's seen the signs. I only stuck them up the other day. Didn't know she was there. Sorry, carry on.
Well, Nick, I mean, this sounds a bit like one of those crazy stories, and you sort of read into it and think, but will it actually happen? You know, they're putting these buffer zones up in Scotland, these what they call safe access zones, but they must have thought of this, the idea that people might be living there. Can it be the case that the police are going to kick down a door because someone's saying the Hail Mary?
It could happen, Andrew, because I happen to have the article here. And the part Cressa's referring to, the word is recklessly. So they say here, activities in a private place, such as a house, within the area between the protected premises and the boundary of a zone, could be an offence if they can be seen or heard within the zone and are done intentionally or recklessly. So if
How
you're
do you pray
recklessly... Andrew, have you not prayed recklessly? You've never lived.
I haven't. What, is it through a megaphone?
If you're praying recklessly in your bedroom near an abortion clinic, you could now be done by whoever, you know, the Scottish police.
But surely it wouldn't actually happen, would it?
I think this could happen.
My
initial thought was, oh, come on, do we have to iron out every possibility? And then I thought, well, no, it's not that unlikely, is it, for somebody to be religious, to have some kind of display or possibly to be discussing religion at home, and they live next to...
Are you against buffer zones full stop?
Yes, because this question, could it happen? You would never have imagined that in England you could be arrested for silently praying in your head. And yet that's already happened. And not only has it happened, people even on my Twitter have said, well, Nick, they were in the buffer zone. I'm like, the buffer zone just made up 10 minutes ago. It's not like... Because abortion is such a contentious issue, and in this country many people are quite aggressively pro-choice, they've been very clever in choosing that issue, because then people end up defending... They say, well, these women are, you know... And I understand the women are under duress, and you're in this zone, and you can see the argument, how it builds, but then it's such a radically anti-free speech, not just free speech, but free thought argument.
So what about these buffer zones, Chris? I mean, do you think there is a case to be made that there are women who are vulnerable, who are going to this clinic, and they don't want to be surrounded by people who are praying on their behalf?
Oh, it's difficult, isn't it, Andrew?
Do you think?
Well, I have enormous sympathy for these women, but I think Nick's right. I think they've picked a topic where you can see that these women are very, very vulnerable to argue a much broader point. I don't want to bin them, but I also sort of agree with Nick. I think it's very difficult.
Because in America, to go back to the First Amendment, you know, we had this situation where there were the funerals of dead soldiers from Iraq, and the family were holding funerals, and the Westboro Baptist Church were protesting right outside the funerals, saying that these young men were going to burn in hell with pickets right next to the funeral. But because of the First Amendment, because of freedom of expression, they were allowed to do that. So should they be allowed to do that?
Yeah, it's very tricky, because there's obviously how can you police a line between... Like, if someone was screaming at a woman, you know, and throwing pig's blood on her, you might say, whatever, you know, people used to throw blood at people or whatever it was, you'd say that's very tasty. You shouldn't probably be allowed to do that. But
that's physical assault, to be fair.
Yeah, that's physical assault. But someone praying in their head, obviously completely different.
Yes.
So I don't know how you'd police that line. And it may be that you do have to allow the people there to avoid this absurdly draconian literal thought police.
Interesting. OK, well, we're going to move on now. We've got a question from Linda. Hello, Linda. Hi.
Hello. Should the Vodafone company be advising parents about their children's behaviour?
Yeah, I saw this as well. This went viral. It was actually Jan Williams from Spike who tweeted about this. Basically, she discovered that on the Vodafone website, there's a section called How to Speak to Your Child About Gender Identity. And this gives advice to adults talking to their kids about this very... Shouldn't they just be selling phones?
I smell an activist. What's going on?
Do you think there's an activist at Vodafone sort of
Yes, I think there's somebody in there who's got some ideology of their own, and they've gone in and said, we'll just pop this on the website, and maybe some managers waved it through. I can't believe people are still letting this happen.
Well, also because gender identity is very much a faith-based idea. You know, it would be like putting up a page about the Holy Trinity and explaining how that works and how to talk to your children about the Holy Trinity. But Vodafone haven't done that yet, which is interesting. Why not?
Well, I think the idea of morally neutral institutions is a myth, even in private institutions. So if you think about the past, you might have had an advert in the sort of, imagine mid-century America, and all these adverts are like, you know, Audrey needs to do the washing and Father's coming home. They had a certain moral outlook already built in. What we have now is, as Cressida says, essentially activists, because you've got people, imagine who's working there. They've been to university, they've already been through the ideological programming system, or they're smart enough to look at the corporate culture and see, OK, it helps me if I believe these certain things. And even if they're going to lose money for the company, they're thinking, where's my next move? Which company am I going to? What's going to help my career individually? Not what makes the board money. So there's a conflict of interest there.
Yes, because I can't imagine this being a real sort of money spinner for Vodafone. No. It's not like people are looking for a phone company to teach them about gender identity.
But you've noticed with so-called woke capitalism, I'm sure, there are values that transcend making money.
Yes.
And it's for very, very complicated reasons to do with this sort of all-pervasive total state. But it's also to do with this more simple reason Chris has also mentioned, people within the organisation with a different agenda.
So strange, because I've seen lots of tweets about this saying that people are going to cancel their Vodafone contracts as a result of this. We did, by the way, contact Vodafone to see if they would come on for an interview, and weirdly, they said no, or they didn't actually just get back to us at all. I wonder why. Anyway.
Bad reception.
Maybe a bad reception, yeah. Very good, Nick. OK, well, next on Free Speech Nation, activists appear to have gone to desperate lengths by releasing thousands of live crickets, a plague of crickets, if you will, at a gay rights conference. We're going to learn more just after the break. Don't go anywhere.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
A furious online debate has been sparked after, well, let's just say a rather large man, I mean, he really was big, was snapped trying to fit into his seat on a plane.
It's led to some to ask whether obese passengers should have to pay for extra plane seats so they don't inconvenience others.
Some say, though, that's cruel. So should plus-size passengers pay extra for plane seats? Let's talk to former presenter of Fat Families, Steve Miller, who's in Stratford-upon-Avon, and the director of All About Obesity, Sarah LeBrock, who's in beautiful Harrogate. Good to see you both this morning. Sarah, what do you think?
Well, we've had this debate before with Steve and I, to be fair, and I think it's one of those things where planes are just not fit for purpose anymore. So people's bodies have been growing over the years. We know this, the obesity rates are increasing, etc. But what's happening to planes is the seats are decreasing in size. So they're just not fit for purpose and not fit for the population. So I think it's just one of these things where we need to be more empathetic to people, that they're trying to fit into an environment that isn't shaped for them at all. So I think we do need to kind of say, well, what's right here? Is it the person not being able to fit in the seat, or is it the seat not being fit for purpose for the person? And I think we need to really, look at things from that perspective as well. Instead of thinking the person's doing something wrong, how about the environment might be doing something wrong?
Steve?
It's not about blaming, but the message you can't put out, in my opinion, is that it's okay to be obese and don't worry about it. You see, what I'm saying here is free plane seats. If you're offering free plane seats, an extra seat, that's going to normalise obesity.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. So it appears that activists have resorted to some desperate lengths. On Friday afternoon, thousands of crickets were released at the annual LGB Alliance conference, which promotes lesbian, gay and bisexual rights. And it caused the 600 attendees to evacuate the room. Activists are said to have dropped plastic sacks filled with the insects during one of the last talks of the day. The group Trans Kids Deserve Better claimed responsibility for the stunt, saying, "Our Crick kids put a stop to their hate, masquerading as an event for social progress, and we couldn't be prouder." OK, well, I'm delighted to say that I have got from LGB Alliance, Bev Jackson, here to talk to me about it now. Bev, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
So we've had a statement from this group that are claiming responsibility. Obviously, there's an ongoing investigation.
Of course.
But what on earth are they talking about? Hate? What do they mean by this?
Well, they call themselves Trans Kids Deserve Better, and, of course, they've claimed responsibility. We don't know that yet, but that's what they've claimed. They have done actions in the past, really quite dangerous, climbing walls and occupying buildings for weeks. You wonder where the parents are. I do think trans kids do deserve better. They deserve better than to be told lies that they might have been born in the wrong body. They deserve better than to be told that these hormones and surgeries that they're clamouring for will somehow solve all their problems. Many are on the autism spectrum. Many are struggling with their sexual orientation. We know that. They deserve better than to be told that we hate them.
Yes.
They do, and they deserve better than to be labelled trans when they're going through all the turbulence of adolescence when your feelings about yourself are in constant flux.
And, of course, as you say, I mean, we know from Hannah Barnes's research that between 80 and 90% of adolescents referred to the Tavistock were same-sex attracted. And the individuals responsible for this, I saw the footage online, they look very, very young.
Very young. Interestingly, both Kate Barker and Kate Harris spoke to these young girls. Kate Barker approached one who looked a bit nervous and said hello and offered her a biscuit.
Yes, and Kate is from the LGB Alliance.
Yes, Kate Barker's the CEO of LGB Alliance, and she offered one of these girls a biscuit. And after the incident, Kate Harris, our co-founder, went up to them and said, what is it you want to say to us?
Yes.
And what have you got to say? And they were sort of in a little huddle and quite... You could see they're frightened to talk to us because they have been told that we wish them harm or that we hate them. And she said, look, get in touch, you know, we're happy to set up a meeting. We like dialogue.
So this does sound a little bit like, given the youth of the perpetrators and given the fact that they didn't have much to say to you, I mean, it suggests that there's another hand involved here, doesn't it? That someone else...
Yes, I mean, obviously, I can't say too much about that. We've got several names of adults who are likely to have been the people behind this, and that is all part of the ongoing investigation. But interestingly, when Kate Barker went outside immediately after the incident, she noticed a couple of black-clad, masked figures with a camera that had been set up on a tripod, focused on the entrance, as if it was waiting to capture some incident, which, of course, I mean, there was no evacuation. We moved out of the hall and we moved into a different room to have the next session. And a brilliant session, I have to say. I mean, I'm so proud of LGB Alliance. We were set up, we're almost now at the 5th anniversary, the 19th of October 2019, when we had our inaugural secret meeting at Conway Hall. This was our 4th conference at the QE2 Centre, and we've just... it was such an important one, partly because there were so many international visitors, and especially hearing from the Americans that LGB Alliance have played a huge role in moving the dial, in getting people to realise that the organisations that used to be gay rights organisations are now homophobic. It's such a difficult message that when you first tell people that, they think you must be mad. But now, with LGBT Alliance, we have been able to explain, yes, if you tell kids in their teenage years who may be experiencing their emerging sexual orientation that they might be in the wrong body. I spoke to one young lesbian recently who came from the west coast of the United States, and she said that when she was at high school, the only people who called themselves lesbians were men. The only people who called themselves lesbians were men who called themselves women and who were attracted to women. These are straight men. And so actual lesbians didn't want to call themselves lesbians because of that connotation. It's sort of mixed in with pornography, so they call themselves non-binary or queer instead.
I mean, that's interesting. I saw a tweet that went viral from a very young, a young lesbian, saying that she doesn't really see lesbians who have she, her pronouns anymore, that it's all they, them now. So it's almost as though this movement seems to just erase homosexuality.
Yeah, it's really, really frightening because it has captured so many of our institutions, and I find that just really worrying. And our first session, though, was with a very young, brave young lesbian who does TikTok videos and who is exposing how difficult it is to be growing up as a young lesbian who goes to an LGBT group and finds she's the only lesbian there.
I mean, I want to ask you about this because, you know, obviously you come from a gay activist background, Gay Liberation Front, and Kate, who began LGBT Alliance with you, was from Stonewall, I believe.
That's right, yes. She was very active in Stonewall for years.
So you both come from this gay activist front and background. Is it depressing to you that you've had to effectively come back and do it all over again? I mean, I've spoken to a lot of gay people who said it's harder to be gay now than it was in the 80s.
Yes, people don't believe it, but it is absolutely harder because although there was a lot of homophobia when I was growing up in the 1970s and 1980s, you always had places to go where you met other gays and lesbians, and they were fine. And you didn't have people banging on the windows or calling you horrible names from within what you thought was your own community, which was once our own community.
And then, you know, we see this example of you know, this instance of anti-gay activism. It's an attack on a gay conference. I don't think we should call it anything else. And yet you see people like India Willoughby online, celebrities, cheering on anti-gay activism. This is the reality of
I don't think
gay.
I would call India Willoughby a celebrity, but...
OK. Well, I was being polite, I suppose.
But it's true. I mean, they refer to it as a hate event, and the people who refer to it in that way or refer to us as haters obviously know nothing about us. And you notice that, actually, when you meet new people, if they don't know anything and they've been told all these... And then they discover that we're actually quite nice.
Yeah. Funny that, isn't it? But are the police treating this as a hate crime? Because it looks to me like an attack on a group of people, a group of gay people gathering to talk about gay rights. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with the idea of hate crime, but if they are going to apply it, doesn't it apply in this case?
Well, I was going to say, I'm not going to talk about the investigation. I don't know what sort of criminal charges might be brought. I don't know what sort of civil action might be brought. Obviously, there's going to be a huge cleaning bill and fumigation. These insects were not only on one floor, but they were taken into the lift, and so that means that the whole building had to be fumigated, and that's obviously an extremely expensive thing. Somebody's going to have to pay for that. But I cannot talk about the investigation of the adults. And I do want to stress, obviously, I feel very ambivalent about these children. On the one hand, I think, you know, these are kids. They've been manipulated. And I have a lot of sympathy for kids who have been manipulated. And these are the children we're trying to save from being medicalised and having their lives ruined. On the other hand, teenagers have to take responsibility for their actions, don't they? And what is wrong with the adults in their lives? What is wrong with their parents who allow them to perch up dangerously in the middle of London for days on end? Why have these parents not learnt the most important part of parenting, which sometimes you have to say no. You have to say no, and you have to teach them how not to let themselves be manipulated. These malign adults who, in the background, are very likely to have been manipulating them and paid for this event. Why are their parents not protecting them? There's something very wrong going on here.
And does it suggest that there is a further problem insofar as some of the most virulent homophobia that I've seen online has come from within trans activist circles, using old-school homophobic slurs, talking about how AIDS was a good thing, all sorts of horrendous things. And then you have this crickets, insects unleashed. I mean, the optics of that very much. It's the sort of thing that the neo-Nazis might have done back in the 80s.
Well, I don't think they've read their Old Testament, have they? Because unleashing a plague of locusts, it's not the good guys that do that.
No, exactly.
And it was a foolish action, also quite unpleasant for people who had to see these hapless insects being trampled on and hoovered up.
Yes.
Horrible for the staff, these people, minimum wage staff who had to deal with this. I just think it was just such a poorly conceived and unpleasant action all round, and driven by hate, at least ignorance, and we need to find a way forward in which people are not told these lies anymore. These lies are unmasked. No, these kids they deserve better. They deserve better.
Yes, and as you say, conversation is key. And you would be happy to have a conversation with anyone who has these reservations.
Of course, we've always said so.
But this is such an authoritarian thing to do, to try and prevent other people from talking. I mean, like you say, these aren't the good guys here, and it would be strange that anyone could conceive of them as being so. Finally, just tell us about the conference. What sort of speakers did you have, and what sort of event were you trying to put on there?
Well, as I said, so we started off with this young lesbian who was explaining what it's like to be a young lesbian, how difficult it is now, and very, very courageous young woman. And then we had a panel of gay men talking about their different ages, although the point was made that they, in spite of many efforts, they could not find a 20-something. So they had some 30-somethings and 40-somethings and 50-somethings and 60-somethings, but the 20-somethings did not dare.
They were not represented.
They couldn't. They don't dare. They don't dare. It's too scary out there. And even though we're hearing signs from within the LGBTQ world that, that there are many, many, many more people now who agree with us, but it's not always easy to come forward.
Yeah.
And then we had a media panel, which was fantastic, in which Kathleen, for instance, talked about the problems within the BBC and the complete failure of impartiality at the BBC and her valiant efforts to do something about that. And we heard about The Guardian also used to be... I mean, I grew up... For decades, I got all my news from The Guardian and the BBC, and they have now completely abandoned the field of impartiality, so that was really very interesting. We had a fantastic keynote address from James Trafford, so it's really, really inspiring and very passionate,
yes.
and in praise also of us, which was very heartening. And then I did a legal panel with Aqua Reindorf and Michael Foran, these experts, and also Lizzie Pitts, who's been through one of these cases, in which they really explained some very important things which are constantly misunderstood about the Equality Act and the Gender Recognition Act and the way they interact.
And will people be able to see these online at all?
Yes, so those were all recorded, and they will be online. The very, very interesting talk that Kate Harris did, the interview with Jamie Reid, that's going to be redone because we had to do it in the other room.
Yes.
It's fascinating. She's a whistleblower. She worked at a gender clinic and she saw close up how these gender clinics were failing these kids, and now she has blown the whistle on them. And we had a really, really good talks about possible collaboration, and that was a fantastic talk. And I just really enjoyed it, and I just feel so proud of LGB Alliance.
Brilliant. Well, where can people find out more about LGB Alliance?
Well, we have, of course, on our website, lgballiance.org.uk, and our Twitter Twitter account, @AllianceLGB, my own personal Twitter account, Bev Jackson Auth, AUTH. Also, I tend to tweet quite frequently. Not allowed to say tweet anymore. Post, I suppose.
You post on X?
Yes.
Yes, you've got to get with the times, Bev.
Yes.
Thanks ever so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And next on Free Speech Nation, I'm going to be talking to Jenny Lindsay, whose new book talks about women being hounded for standing up for their rights. She joins me in just a moment.
Good evening and welcome to your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Through this evening, largely dry across the eastern half of the country, but we will have rain arriving from the west and it'll be turning milder as well. So ridge of high pressure at first, fairly settled conditions, but we do have this area of rain and this frontal system out towards the west with southerly winds developing through the end of Sunday. So fairly patchy rain across the far north, but across the far southwest, Wales, Devon and Cornwall, heavy rain and quite strong winds developing as we head through this evening, quite blustery across the southern half of the UK, and that frontal system slowly moving its way eastwards. Milder for all, particularly across the southwest, but even parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland a touch higher, although there still will be a few isolated frost patches in rural spots. Back to the southern half of the UK though, so quite a damp start. It could be quite difficult driving conditions through the morning rush hour with some spray on the road. But further north, it'll start to become a bit drier and brighter. Certainly for places such as Northern Ireland and parts of North East and Scotland, it'll be a fairly dry, bright and crisp start to the day on Monday. Further west, across the Western Isles, still lingering on underneath that band of rain and with those stronger winds coming from that southerly direction. Through the rest of Monday, though, that front system does move off in towards the North Sea and it does become drier, particularly across western parts through the rest of Monday. Further north, there's particularly some decent sunshine across Northern Ireland and Scotland, but further south, it's quite stubbornly holding on to that cloud. So mild temperatures, but still fairly cool. Temperatures again into the double figures across Scotland and some bright sunshine. Tuesday will be starting generally cloudier for much of the UK, and notice these winds will be picking up as well. So particularly parts of Scotland will notice a more blustery feel on Tuesday, and then we begin to see some areas of showers moving in from the west. So largely dry on Tuesday, showers spreading in on the west on Wednesday, but it will be a touch drier for most on Thursday. That's all from me. Bye for now.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player app. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Conservative MPs have finally chosen their top two for the leadership. And now, it's over to the members. Join me, Christopher Hope, on Thursday as Kevin Badenoch and Robert Jenrick are quizzed by Conservative Party members and myself at our GB News leadership event.
And afterwards, join me, Patrick Christys, with a live studio audience and a star panel as we discuss what it means for the Conservative Party and what it means for you. Decision Time, the race to lead, from 7 p.m. this Thursday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. Later in the show, I'll be turning agony uncle with the help of my panel. Nick Dixon and Cressida Wetton will help you deal with your unfiltered dilemmas. So just message us at gbnews.com/your say and we'll help you deal with all of your issues. A new book written by the poet Jenny Lindsay explores her and others' experiences with trans campaigners and the ways in which women who speak up for their rights are silenced. Hounded, as the title suggests, documents exactly that, the activists attempting to shut her down or cancel her by working in packs, organising protests, petitions and pile-ons, or because she and other women express the controversial opinions that they believe in the reality of biological sex. Well, Jenny, I'm delighted to say, joins me now. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, Jenny, Hounded, tell us about the genesis of the book.
Well, I was actually, which is rare in gender critical circles, I was actually approached to consider writing the book. I, as you say, have experienced this sort of gamut of, I call it gender identity activism, because what has been centred isn't actually trans identity itself, it's gender identity.
Yes.
So gender identity campaigners had targeted me in the Scottish Arts to the point where I felt compelled to write an 8,205-word essay exploring my own experiences in detail, because what happens if you get hounded, particularly if you're not somebody who is uncancelable,
yes,
shall we say. And although performance poetry is one of the world's most lucrative art forms, I was not exactly in a position to survive it.
What sort of harassment were you experiencing?
So, it would take far too long to go into my own experiences, to be honest with you. But what the book is trying to do and why I was approached to write it was off the back of the essay that I wrote about my own experiences.
Yes.
So what I identified in that essay and what the publisher Polity was interested in doing was looking at the different types of harms faced by women who speak out in the gender wars. So this isn't about the harms of the ideology itself. Those harms have been
talked about and written about at length by so many people, and actually that's one of the first harms. So I split the book into psychological harms, social harms, economic harms, and democratic harms. One of the first psychological harms, obviously, if you are a woman with the core beliefs that we have, is that as this ideology scaffolds around you, you do start to feel a bit like you're going mad.
Yes.
Because we have the core beliefs, I'll just set them out. You can agree with them or not, but the first one is that women are materially definable as a category of human being. We believe that women on that basis are legislatively, culturally and politically important, that it has political salience. And the third thing that any woman who's been hounded in the gender wars believes is that women should have unfettered right to freedom of speech and assembly on matters that affect us profoundly.
Yes.
So those are the three core beliefs. If you look at any woman, whether it's Maya Forstater, Kelly J. Keane, Jane Clare Jones, myself, Millie Hill, Rosie Kay, all of us have tripped the wire on one or all three of those core beliefs. So in order to assess whether or not we deserve our houndings, we're going to have to assess whether those views are true and what the consequences of holding those beliefs are.
It's very interesting. I mean, you mentioned some names of people who've been on this show to talk about their experiences. Some really frightening harassment, bullying, I would call it. And as you say, it can have economic ramifications, all sorts of problems. But as you say, in a way, whether what you're saying is true or not shouldn't justify this kind of public shaming and cancel culture.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I take what I call my ideal reader on the journey up to that conclusion, I must say.
Right.
So my book is an academic. It's for a lay reader, so somebody who's maybe kind of aware of this issue. They're kind of aware that, you know, something's happening to do with gender, but they're not particularly sort of in the trenches like we are, you know.
Yes.
So they're kind of aware that something kind of disquieting is happening. Because this is the fact, to be honest with you, there are still a sizable number of people who don't actually really know exactly the extent of what's going on. So my book doesn't just focus on the headline cases. I'm focusing on women that nobody will ever have heard of.
That's a really key point, because a lot of the time when we think of cancel culture, we hear about attempts on celebrities, attempts to cancel celebrities, but the vast majority of cases are people you never hear of.
Exactly, and as I said to the Daily Telegraph the other day, a lot of their viewers have never heard, some of you will never have heard of me. I mean, you know, and I'm often tagged in on Twitter to these kind of arguments where people are like, oh, if you don't think cancel culture is real, look what happened to Jenny Lindsay. And it's like, yeah, I wasn't well known enough to survive a hounding.
Yes.
What I've had to do is write my way out of my hounding, but I'm writing non-fiction. I'm not writing performance poetry stage shows anymore, so I've had to find a new way to do it.
It's a fascinating topic and very, very timely, this book. So just tell us quickly, you're having a launch, I believe, for the book.
I am. The reason that I'm spirited onto your bill this evening is I'm actually down in London, very rarely leave the house, but I've got a book launch tomorrow with the Free Speech Union at the Hippodrome. I think there's a smattering of tickets still left for that, so I'll be speaking with Kate Clancy and Matthew Hamilton as
Fantastic. Well. And the book is called Hounded, and it's out now.
It is out now.
Fantastic. Right. Jenny, thanks so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. And next on Free Speech Nation, I'll be joined by award-winning playwright and author C.J. Hopkins, who was recently found guilty of hate speech in Berlin. Back in a moment.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom. Weekday mornings from 9:30.
We shouldn't have to do this, Rebecca. These men should have been compensated long ago.
They shouldn't have to fight for recognition. And this is what's happened over the last 72 years. So all the way through from the test through to the present day, they've known that something happened to them. They've seen what they've been through, their medical conditions, the fact that many of these servicemen died well before their time. And they were ignored in a way that other countries didn't ignore their similar testing veterans. So other nuclear powers across the world, the US, for example, compensated and recognised their nuclear testing veterans many, many years ago. Yet, unfortunately, successive governments in the UK failed to do that. After the long campaign for medallic recognition, finally, these servicemen received medallic recognition, but it came in a jiffy bag in the post, which is not the way to honour the service that these men gave to our country. There needs to be an understanding and an uncovering of the truth of what they actually went through. They've been fighting for many years for access to their medical records, for example, urine and blood tests that they know were taken during their service. But when many of these families have tried to access their records, these test results seem to be missing, and there's no explanation as to why this has happened.
What basis does the Ministry of Defence say it's not our responsibility?
Well, we know from other studies across the world and subsequent studies, it showed, staggeringly, that these men were exposed to the same amount of radiation as clean-up workers at Chernobyl.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark Meets at My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. Last month, the playwright, author and political satirist C.J. Hopkins had his acquittal overturned by the highest court in Berlin and was found guilty of hate speech. His crime was that he had criticised Germany's COVID narrative, comparing it to the Third Reich, and tweeted the cover of his book, The Rise of the New Normal Reich, which included a picture of a mask and a swastika. And he was convicted of spreading pro-Nazi propaganda. So C.J. Hopkins joins me from Berlin now. Welcome to the show. Let's talk first about the book. There was an image of a swastika on the book. Is that what caused the problem here?
Yeah, it was actually not the book cover itself, but I tweeted 2 tweets back in 2022, including the cover art from the book. And the tweets were criticizing the mask mandates. And I wrote the tweets in German. And that's what started the whole affair.
Can you clarify for us how this could have possibly violated German law? What is it precisely that they were accusing you of?
In Germany, and I think a lot of people know this, but there's a lot of misunderstanding about it. Swastikas are, displaying swastikas or other Nazi symbols or insignia is banned generally. Germany doesn't want neo-Nazis running around waving swastikas and SS runes and so on. And I actually agree with this law. I'm a free speech absolutist, but I make an exception for Germany because of its history. This law, however, contains several key exceptions. And of course it does, because you couldn't teach a history class or show a Quentin Tarantino film or create art if there weren't exceptions to this ban. 2 of the exceptions are key to my case, one of which is art, basically. And the other of which is they make an exception to this ban if one is displaying a swastika to counter anti-constitutional activity. Unfortunately, the Kammergericht, the Superior Court in Berlin, is trying to pervert the law a little bit, and they have somehow decided that this anti-constitutional activity that one is countering has to be specifically Nazi-related.
Well, can I ask you, C.J., what was the point you were trying to make through the use of the swastika, through the comparison with the Third Reich?
The point that I was trying to make was pretty simple. In 2020, the German government, the current German government, suspended the constitution, banned protests, started censoring dissent, eventually rolled out, the police goon squads to beat people up who weren't cooperating. And by the end of it, they were right on the verge of passing vaccination mandates, forcing everyone to be vaccinated. So in other words, there was all this anti-constitutional activity going on. And in the book, I was covering it in my essays all during this time. And basically what I was saying is, hey, look at what the German government has been doing since 2020. And isn't this a bit reminiscent of the rise of Nazi Germany and the way the Constitution was suspended and all the decrees were put through?
But what I find confusing about that is because even if someone doesn't agree with your perspective on the lockdown, they can surely see that what you are doing is not endorsing the Nazis, quite the opposite. So how can it be that the prosecutors are persisting with this when they must know that you yourself are not a neo-Nazi?
Well, Andrew, you mentioned it. The first court that I was tried at acknowledged right off the bat. They said, okay, this guy is not guilty because he's obviously not promoting the Nazis. He's using Nazi Germany and using the swastika symbol as a way of criticizing the current government. And therefore, the only logical conclusion is that he sees the Nazis as a negative, force. Right. It's common sense. It's unmistakable. The prosecution was not happy with that. And in Germany, they're allowed to appeal an acquittal. And so they took it to the Superior Court. The Superior Court, it was pretty clear at my trial, my hearing, that they had made up their mind in advance before my attorney made his arguments. Andrew, the long and short of it is this isn't really a story about the law, the German law, and the nuances of the German law. The German authorities want to punish me because I criticized their COVID measures rather harshly, and they're doing it.
Well, I mean, it's a fascinating story. Can you tell us just very quickly, because we're short on time, where is the case now? Where do we stand?
We're going to the German Constitutional Court, which is basically the German Supreme Court. That's all we have left. The Superior Court pronounced me guilty in a funny way that prevented me from going back to the district court and having all of my other arguments heard and so on and so forth. So they've basically denied me a right to a fair hearing. We're taking, my lawyer is preparing a complaint now to the German Supreme Court, the Constitutional Court, and that's what we've got left. That's where we're going.
But as it stands, you do have a hate speech conviction for this satirical book.
Oh, yes, yes. As it stands, I'm officially a hate criminal.
Absolutely astonishing stuff. Well, I'm afraid we're out of time, but I'd love you to come back on at a later date and give us an update on this story, if you would. CJ Hopkins, thanks very much for joining me. Well, that's the end of the first hour on Free Speech Nation, but please don't go away because there is a lot more to come between now and 9 o'clock. Don't go anywhere.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening and welcome to your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Through this evening, largely dry across the eastern half of the country, but we will have rain arriving from the west and it'll be turning milder as well. So ridge of high pressure at first, fairly settled conditions, but we do have this area of rain and this frontal system out towards the west with southerly winds developing through the end of Sunday. So fairly patchy rain across the far north, but across the far southwest, Wales, Devon and Cornwall, heavy rain and quite strong winds developing as we head through this evening, quite blustery across the southern half of the UK, and that frontal system slowly moving its way eastwards. Milder for all, particularly across the southwest, but even parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland a touch higher, although there still will be a few isolated frost patches in rural spots. Back to the southern half of the UK though, so quite a damp start. It could be quite difficult driving conditions through the morning rush hour with some spray on the road. But further north, it'll start to become a bit drier and brighter. Certainly for places such as Northern Ireland and parts of North East and Scotland, it'll be a fairly dry, bright and crisp start to the day on Monday. Further west across the Western Isles, still lingering on underneath that band of rain and with those stronger winds coming from that southerly direction. Through the rest of Monday, though, that front system does move off in towards the North Sea and it does become drier, particularly across western parts through the rest of Monday. Further north has particularly some decent sunshine across Northern Ireland and Scotland, but further south, it's quite stubbornly holding on to that cloud. So mild temperatures, but still fairly cool. Temperatures again into the double figures across Scotland and some bright sunshine. Tuesday will be starting generally cloudier for much of the UK, and notice these winds will be picking up as well. So particularly parts of Scotland will notice a more blustery feel on Tuesday, and then we begin to see some areas of showers moving in from the west. So largely dry on Tuesday, showers spreading in on the west on Wednesday. but it will be a touch drier for most on Thursday. That's all from me. Bye for now.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Online dating apps are still the go-to for millions of British adults, with 1 in 10 using them to look for a romantic connection.
Yes, are you one of them? Let us know. But with many apps introducing subscription fees and complex algorithms, the world of online dating has never been harder to navigate. So who better to join us to discuss this than Mr. Tinder himself, Stéphane Pierre Tomlin. You have been dubbed Britain's best-looking eligible bachelor.
Yeah, so this happened back in 2016. Got an email from Tinder, and it was like, "You're the most swiped man on Tinder."
So just explain to us, for viewers who don't know, what is swiping? What does that mean on Tinder?
Yeah, so on Tinder, the app, if you swipe left, that means you don't like the person in front of you, and if you swipe to the right, that means you like that person.
So do you mind still being associated with that? It's a good thing.
Well, I mean, yeah, it made me who I am now, and I love sharing how I was successful, and now I'm like a dating expert.
What's your situation now? Are you with anyone? Are you still single?
So I'm seeing someone at the minute. Things are going well, and I'm a dating expert, so I'm always giving advice to people.
Does she know your title of most swiped?
Of course, who doesn't?
Yeah,
It's quite hard. It's quite hard being the most swiped man on Tinder because you get a label on you. So I find it harder than anyone else, to be honest.
And where did you meet her? That's the big question.
At an event.
So not on Tinder?
Not on Tinder, ironically. Yeah.
So for all that trouble online, it's actually a real life rendezvous. Which,
I mean, I have met people on Tinder in the past, and it has worked. Well, it didn't work, but yeah.
I need to know how to do the famous Stefan Smolder.
That camera is not a camera. That is your best friend, that's your lover. So you really smiles from the camera, so it goes like this.
GB News, the People's Channel.
And there's plenty more still to come on Free Speech Nation this week, but let's get a news update first from Katie Bowen.
Andrew, thank you, and good evening. It's just gone 8 o'clock. These are your latest headlines from the GB newsroom. Developing tonight in the Middle East, Hezbollah has said it launched a drone attack on a military base in northern Israel earlier, with Israeli medics reporting that around 60 people have been injured in the attack on the Golani Brigade camp. The IDF has not yet confirmed the number of casualties. It comes as this afternoon Israeli military said that one of its tanks entered a UN post in southern Lebanon while attempting to evacuate injured soldiers, adding that its actions pose no danger to the UN peacekeeping force. 15 peacekeepers were reportedly injured in what the UN called a shocking violation. The US has also announced tonight that they will send an anti-missile system to Israel, along with troops to operate it. The Terminal High Altitude Area Defence is a type of battery that requires 95 troops to operate it, and it can be used to defend against different types of ballistic missiles. Back at home, Alex Salmond's family have paid tribute to him this evening after the former First Minister of Scotland died yesterday at the age of 69. In a statement released by the Alba Party tonight, Mr Salmond's family said that Alex was a formidable politician, an amazing orator, an outstanding intellect and admired throughout the whole world. The Alba Party leader died yesterday afternoon from a suspected heart attack during a trip to North Macedonia. Ahead of the International Investment Summit tomorrow, Jonathan Reynolds says it's not the government's position that P&O Ferries is a rogue operator, despite a press release earlier this week calling them a rogue employer. P&O Ferries' owner, DP World, will now attend the summit. They had previously threatened to pull out of the event and a £1 billion port investment after the Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, criticised their employment strategy and called for a boycott. The operator was criticised by politicians from both main parties in March 2022, when it suddenly sacked 800 British seafarers and replaced them with cheaper, mainly overseas staff, saying it was necessary to stave off bankruptcy. The business secretary told GB News' Camilla Tominey that the £1 billion investment will go ahead.
Quickly on this issue, that's not the government's position. The issue, obviously, with penal furries is we're not going to recoil from that. We thought it was wrong, the fire and rehire that we saw, those workers being sacked and then taken back on fewer terms and conditions. But we have changed the law. It was lawful under the Conservative government. It will be unlawful under this Labour government. So where companies accept that, acknowledge that, can work within that framework, we'll, of course, talk to them about investments. And I can tell you they're coming to the summit and the investment will go ahead.
And finally this evening, Elon Musk's SpaceX has pulled off a world first after the Starship rocket booster was captured on its return to Earth. If you're watching on television, you can see these extraordinary pictures of the rocket landing. This is the 5th test of the Starship rocket, and the rocket also made a successful water landing in the Indian Ocean. Those are your latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Katie Bowen. More from me in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. Well, as you can hear, we've got a wonderful studio audience here, so let's get some more questions from them. We're going to start with Robert. Where is Robert?
Andrew, good evening. It's a quick one. Security guards, how on earth can they be suspended for dispersing a group of individuals who are evidently not female from ladies' toilets at Butlins?
Yeah, the Butlins story has been going a bit wild this week, and it's a bit of a crazy one. Cressida, can you explain what happened here?
Well, some people who identified as women, but some people might say weren't women, were asked to leave the toilets in Butlins. I think it started off with just one person. And then some other trans women got involved and defended that person. And then there were 5 of them, I believe, in the
So there are 5 men who identify as women in the women's toilets.
Yes.
And some actual women were a bit upset by that, right?
I'm not sure if the actual women were. It's confusing, and the reason it's confusing is because sometimes when you read this in the press, the word woman gets used where I might say trans woman personally, so it's not always clear, because there were some women chanting, let them pee, let them pee. I'm not sure if they were biological. I think they weren't, because then the security guards came in and asked the trans women to leave.
So this is the point, is that the security guards kicked out the trans-identified men from the women's toilets.
Yes.
But now the security guards have been fired.
They're now in trouble, yes, and Butlins have sort of come out and thrown them under the bus and said this is disappointing. I think they're an external company.
Right. But weren't they doing their job? I mean...
Well, you'd think so. I would just say, although we think of Butlins as very traditional values, holiday camp for families, this was actually for Bangface Festival, which is much more sort of modern and blue hair and...
Right.
Well, it's called Bangface. You can imagine what goes on there.
Yes.
Which I think is relevant.
But it's not really fair on the security guards, is it? Because don't they have a responsibility to make sure that the women's facilities is women only? I mean, that's part of their job, isn't it?
You would think so, and that's probably been their job for a very, very long time until quite recently.
Yeah, so I mean, this seems very unfair on the staff, doesn't it, Nick?
Yeah, well, when I read the piece, it's possible the security guards were a touch overzealous, but then Butlins getting rid of them and then issuing this sort of typical apology saying we're an inclusive business and all this garbage. They very clearly sided against women's safety and in favour, much like we said before with Vodafone, in favour of the prevailing ideology.
So they're inclusive to men who want to go into women's toilets?
It's very inclusive, that, isn't it?
It's incredibly inclusive.
Well, they would say they would argue that there wouldn't be any bad faith actors in there.
Right.
And I don't think the average trans woman, if you can say that, is necessarily a threat to women. But the point is, you've now created a situation where you could easily have dangerous men going into the women's space.
There were 5 at once, so unless they all needed it at the same time, I do wonder if they were trying to create some sort of a statement.
Yeah.
That's how women work, Nick. We do go...
Well, really, 5 go together.
But as you say,
they talk and stuff.
It doesn't suggest that people who identify as trans are any more predatory. The point is that men do exploit loopholes. Predatory men exploit loopholes wherever and whenever they exist, and they have done since the dawn of time. Why would they not exploit this loophole?
Well, I don't...
Well, they have.
I can't tell you why they wouldn't, because I think they would.
Right.
Not the trans women necessarily, but men who are bad actors.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a very dodgy situation to me. Anyway, we're going to move on to another question now, and this question is coming from Solomon. Hi, Solomon.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Doyle. My question on tonight's show is, should pub landlords have the initiative to sort out the banter when it comes to sorting out the banter within the customers, within the people that attend their pubs and such to police it and to make sure the banter is not overly congested and not overly over the offence or anything?
I've heard the
as
phrase
such as that,
banter cops being used about this story because the pub landlords have been told that under these new reforms to workers' rights, they have to, I suppose, as Solomon says, police the offensive speech that's going on. Difficult in a pub, though, isn't it? Because people tend to be quite offensive, wouldn't you say?
Well, it depends on the situation. Like, if it's after a football match or if it's after an occasion, like if it's an emergency situation, then it could be, depending on the situation as such. But yeah,
but it's
just
still
depending on
not,
the situation, I would
you
say
don't want
yes.
the landlords eavesdropping and then sort of deciding, you know, which jokes are acceptable. I mean, you're pretty offensive sometimes, Nick. Wouldn't you say that you don't want the landlords over your shoulder saying, well, that's not allowed?
No, but I never leave the house or go to pubs, Andrew. So that's how I balance being offensive. Although, of course, in Scotland, you're not allowed to do things in your own house anymore. By the way, Banter Cops is quite a good movie title for, like, Seth Rogen or someone, or a sitcom on Dave or something. Yeah, it's completely absurd. Obviously, it's a free speech issue, but on top of that, it seems a real attack on the English and British tradition of the pub, doesn't it? Which is where it is people share ideas and get together. So it's just a sort of horrible totalitarian Labour attack on the pub.
And there's that sort of sense of humour that you sometimes get in pubs where people are trying to shock each other or say the most... which does accompany football matches and that kind of thing. And
also, it's just an attack on business. Labour are making it virtually impossible to have a business in this country. They're attacking investment. They're going to go after capital gains. They're attacking, employer regulations. Employers can just get constantly sued. Imagine you can get sued for what someone says, what Barry's saying in the corner. It's insane.
Yeah, and I wouldn't want to mess with Barry.
Well, no, and I've lived through lots of Barrys. I've worked in lots of West Country pubs as a kid, and the idea that you could police that environment is
not
hilarious.
possible, is it?
It's often the landlord telling the worst jokes for a start.
Yes.
But it's quite chilling because what that tells me, you can't really whack-a-mole every bad joke out of a pub. So it tells me that the people who are creating this idea actually have no idea how they're going to apply it. It won't be consistent.
So when you were working
and they've never
at
been to a pub, it sounds like.
No, it sounds like it. I mean, you wouldn't have liked, as a member of staff, to go over to Barry and say, that was a bit across the line.
No, I wouldn't.
No.
I would much rather just deal with Barry without getting, without being a reporter.
Yeah, sure, OK. Well, let's get a question now from Anton. Where's Anton? Hello.
Harris have two answers for the same question.
Yeah, well, this was tweeted out. I saw both answers. She had an interview with 60 Minutes, CBS News, and they edited the interview to show her giving an answer to a question, but it wasn't the actual answer that she gave. What they cut, allegedly, was this, what they described as a word salad. And this was all revealed by The Telegraph on Friday. Did you see this? Did you see the actual answer she gave?
Well, I watched them together in tandem, and I thought, oh, that's annoying, I can't understand what she said. And then you watch them separately, and I thought, oh, that's annoying, I can't understand what she said.
No. Well, I think we can actually see it. Have we got this footage? Let's have a look.
It seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
Well, Bill, the work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
We're not going to stop pursuing what is necessary for the United States to be clear about where we stand on the need for this war to end.
Well, there's no doubt there that they've made her sound a lot more eloquent than she actually is. I mean, there's no doubt. Isn't that a kind of election interference here at this point?
It is, and you wonder why they think they won't be rumbled. I suppose they're banking on the low-information voter who doesn't see that. They just see the clip and they don't investigate any further.
Yeah.
But it is incredible. Imagine being such a bad candidate that a random different answer is a better answer to that question. This is Harris. And she needs a teleprompter everywhere she goes. I know you've got one today, Andrew, and I've seen you with it.
But I don't need it. I don't need it. I could ditch it right now. In fact, I will.
You could ditch it. You could.
I will.
Whereas Kamala couldn't. And you see these clips, so she's got it on, like, the floor. She's got it... Unless they're really good Photoshop. Like, there was one the other day, there was a teleprompter, like, secretly in there.
Yes.
There was an angle that showed it that wasn't supposed to. So she's always got them with her. She's got them in the kitchen at home. She's, like, dealing with her husband. It's shocking.
That's incredible. I mean, just seeing the footage like that, I just think How can they get away with it? I mean, I know that the media's gone into overdrive to try and get her elected, no matter what it takes, but that is just crazy.
It's like airbrushing, isn't it? It's the aural equivalent of airbrushing. I mean, as you said, how do they think they're going to get away with it? Of course they're not going to get away with it. I don't know how they could ever think that.
And doesn't this then just help Trump's case?
Yeah.
I mean, clearly, because he keeps going on about how the media are against him, and there's this big conspiracy of the deep state trying not to get him elected, and then that kind of thing happens, and you think, well, maybe he's got a point.
Well, maybe he has, yeah.
You know, which is...
God, we're agreeing with Nick Dixon.
There we go, and that's the worst thing about it. Unbelievable. OK, let's move on now to a question from Alex. Alex. Who's Alex? Ah, hello.
Hello. Hello, Andrew. Was King Arthur LGBT because he once wore a dress?
Yeah, so this is a local council's LGBTQ history timeline. This is a Welsh council. And because he was mentioned in an old story that he once wore women's clothing, although my understanding that this is from the Mabinogion, isn't it?
But it sounded like, I'm sorry to say, that he was doing it to get close to a woman.
Yeah, he was.
Sounds like
that's the story. He was dressing.
Story.
He was cross-dressing to try and get close to, not to kind of reflect his inner gender identity or anything like that.
No, he was trying to get into the toilets at Butlins. It was terrible.
Unbelievable. So what? Right. I mean, aren't we just a bit sick of this now at this point? I mean, is it just a bit boring?
He was married to a woman, and that was probably... He was straight, probably, wasn't he? It's just this kind of revision.
Well, we don't know. Who cares?
Well, no, we don't. It's a good point.
But it's this weird thing of sort of harvesting and recruiting historical figures, which I find really, really funny. There are actual gay kings you could get. You could get Richard Lionheart. You could get Edward II. There are or James I. There are actual authentically gay kings out there that we've got on record. You don't need to recruit people just because they happen to once wear a bit of lipstick or whatever. What do you think of this?
Well, yeah, and you've uncovered the paradox there, Andy, that they want to, on one hand, say history was horrific and patriarchal and oppressive, and none of these people got to look in. Then they want to say, and by the way, all our greatest heroes were LGBTQ.
Yeah, they're all gay.
They were all trans, and so actually, which one is it? You've got to pick one, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's stories like this that make me think I just want to give up. You know what I mean? Like, it's just so boring now at this point. Why do they keep doing it? Anyway, let's get a question from John. Where's John? Hi, John. Hello. John. Oh, can we pass the mic down to John and then he can ask his question? Thank you.
Should people be arrested for criticising Islam?
Well, no, is the answer to that. But there has been a high-profile case this week. This is a Christian pastor who had commented on Islam. He'd also mentioned that sex is binary. That's the big no-no. But he was a street preacher. He was outside Bristol University. His name is Dear Moodley, taken into custody, and he was held for 13 hours in a police cell. And this was... they've dropped this, so we can talk about this now. Yeah. They've dropped it. But the point is that a religious preacher, a Christian preacher, is obviously not going to support the tenets of Islam, just as an Islamic preacher is not going to support the tenets of Christianity. And they both should have the right to say it, clearly, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've got this right. He was asked by somebody in the street which religion he thought had the better... how did they phrase it? The superior morality or something.
Well, what do you expect him to say?
He picked his own
Imagine
religion.
if he said Islam. Much better than my lot.
Exactly,
you know.
exactly. But I don't know, maybe Justin Welby would say that. I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is. So he said he preferred his own religion, and that caused a bit of a ruck.
But why would the police get involved in this? This makes no sense.
It's incredible. He was kept in a cell for 13 hours. His stuff was destroyed, his signs and things like that, which the police said wasn't supposed to happen, but I think the university destroyed them. Right. And so what you see the difference between de facto and de jure. So we live in a world where this is not actually legal. The case, I'm sure, will be won, much as it was...
Yeah, it was dropped. They dropped it.
Yeah, but there's an appeal now. I think there's another case, as I understand, I think, in his favour for some sort of compensation. I could be wrong. But... If that is the case, they'll win. Just like the police lost when they arrested Isabel Vaughan Spruce for the silent praying. Because these things, they're still, like I say, in law. But in reality in the country, we act as if we're, in this case, basically an Islamic theocracy. There's no other way to say it. There's blasphemy laws. In reality, that's how we live. Then you go back and check the actual law, which are from a time before this recent cultural revolution, and you go, oh, this is not the law. We're just acting they're just acting how they want.
What's the logic here? I mean, surely any belief system has to be open to criticism, even ridicule, in a free society. I mean, that's the bottom line, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's just incredible that our head of state is the supreme governor of the Church of England. Yet in reality, if you say anything pro-Christian, you're thrown in jail for 13 hours. Just think about that. That's how insane it is.
Yeah, I can't think what they were thinking or why they were thinking that this would be a positive thing to do. But I am getting worried about this. I know that Labour were talking about redefining Islamophobia, which is a nonsense made-up term anyway, which seems to encapsulate some awful people who would go around actually physically attacking Muslims. Those people should be in prison. That's already illegal. And conflating that with people who just have legitimate criticisms of a belief system they don't share. This doesn't make sense to me.
No, it's really scary stuff, isn't it? As you say, the things that should be illegal are already illegal.
They're already illegal,
You can't
yes.
attack somebody in that way.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's muddying the waters, isn't it? It's taking something really bad and matching it with something that actually is a legitimate concern and implying that they're the same thing.
Yeah, that's really dangerous stuff, I think. OK, well, next on Free Speech Nation, we're going to be talking about the difficult question of assisted dying. Where do you stand on that one? Don't go anywhere.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
The former royal correspondent for The Sun newspaper, Charles Ray. Good to see you this morning, Charles, and so good to see Catherine back to work with a hug.
It is. It's fantastic. I mean, there are a few royal jobs that, touch at the heartstrings, and this is certainly one of those. And I think it's the first time we've actually seen Catherine back in, a royal duty since she herself confirmed that she'd finished chemotherapy.
Done so much, haven't they, the Princess of Wales and the King, to raise awareness for these cancers.
Here we have both the King and Catherine having, explained to the nation and the rest of the world that they were battling or are still battling cancer, just like everyone else.
How sincere is all of this? I mean, it looks like she's a wonderful, kind, caring woman, but I don't know. I've never met her.
Well, she is a wonderful, kind, caring woman. That is without a shadow of a doubt. And William heard about this young lady on a visit to the air ambulance, and they invited her because she's a photographer, so she wanted to take. She has a bucket list and wanted to take pictures of an investiture. I mean, make no mistake, people like Catherine are just absolutely wonderful in what they do and how they do it. I mean, and Catherine is the superstar of the royal family. Of that, there is no doubt.
It's the cockles of my heart, Charles. It really does. It's really good to see you. Thanks very much.
All the
Thanks,
best.
Charles. Thanks. And Liz, who is this 16-year-old amateur photographer who was hugged by Princess of Wales yesterday, has said it was a dream come true.
I bet it was.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. The question of assisted dying has been in the press recently, and I thought we should have a debate about it. We've got Dr. Mark Pickering, who's a prison GP and CEO of the Christian Medical Fellowship, and also Jonathan Romain, a rabbi and social campaigner. Welcome to the show. Thank you both for joining me. I want to come to you first, Dr. Pickering. What is your stance on assisted dying? Where should we go from here?
Basically, the laws we have, it's not without problem, but we know that although suffering at the end of life is often part of life, there's lots that we can do to minimise that through good palliative care. And so much of what we hear from campaigners like Jonathan is scaremongering about, you will have this terrible death, or you could have, and it'll be really painful and really nasty. The only way we can stop it is by changing the law. When actually, what we need to do is just make sure that the really good palliative care that we do have access to is available for everybody, because the thing that's really cruel and broken is when people don't have access to it, and that's thousands of people a year who don't. And what's also really interesting is the drop in public support that's come out in recent polling. Jonathan and other campaigners will often say it's 80% support. It's down to 66% support in the most recent polling this week, and we have to ask why that is.
OK, well, I want to bring in Jonathan Romain here. You've been accused there of scaremongering. Perhaps you'd like to defend yourself against that?
Well, of course, it's not me. It's the thousands of people, and this may well include people in your audience or people listening or watching GB News, who know for a fact that they have had relatives who've died in great pain and agony from cancer, from motor neuron, from Parkinson's. Now, if people want to carry on to their last possible breath, great, and we should support them in every way possible, and I've been a long-standing supporter of palliative care hospices. But if people are suffering and they're dying, and that's a key thing, they're both suffering and they're dying, and they want it of their own free will, then in whose interest are we keeping them alive for the last few weeks or months against their will? It's not a matter of shortening life. It's a matter of shortening death and the death pangs. So if Mark doesn't want it, that's great, but he shouldn't force other people to suffer on against their will, who don't want palliative care for whatever reason, and who do want to say, thank you, God, it's been a great life, I'd like to let go now. And it's not just me. This has been campaigned for thousands of people up and down the country. You've seen Prue Leith, you've seen Esther Ranson. Why are they all asking this? Because they dread the suffering in pain. And palliative care can help, but as Mark well knows, there was recently a parliamentary select committee which showed, and it was expert witnesses from people who are actually opposed to assisted dying, they had to admit that palliative care, although it's great, it cannot always help. And therefore, we're just trying to give people options. It's as simple as that. You decide what you want. Carry on to the last breath, or let go of life gently. Assisted doesn't mean somebody else doing it to you. It means you get the assistance of a doctor who will prescribe you a life-ending potion, which you can then take in your own time, or, by the way, decide not to take.
So, Mark, can I ask you about that then? This is a humanitarian case, the idea being that it's a matter of individual choice. And you would recognise, wouldn't you, that there are individuals who, when they come to the end of their life, are in terrible, terrible pain, and that pain is not going to get any better?
Pain is actually a relatively minor situation, because pain control is generally very good when people have access to palliative care. The fear of pain is different. But what Jonathan said was that we shouldn't be forcing people to hang on. And I'd just like to put that back to him, because campaigners like Paul Lamb, who were paralysed for 30 years and wanted that right to compassion, choice and dignity, were refused by Jonathan and by his fellow campaigners who said, no, you're not terminally ill, we don't want to change the law like that. And why, on the grounds of compassion, choice and dignity, would you draw that false distinction? There is no logical reason to do that. And that's exactly the reason why more than 50 MPs have already lobbied Kim Ledbetter, the MP who's bringing the bill, to say this doesn't go far enough. You really need to take it beyond terminal illness to chronic illness and other things, just like they do in Canada, just like they do in Belgium and the Netherlands. And that really is logically consistent. Many of us don't want it to go that far, but Jonathan just doesn't have a logical case for limiting it.
Well, let's ask
forcing people like Paul Lamb to hang on against his will.
Well, let's ask Jonathan about that specifically, because there have been all sorts of horror stories coming out of Canada, for instance, of coercion by the government to suggest that people should be ending their lives, even when it comes down to issues such as depression. Very young people, in some cases, have lost their lives in this way. Is that acceptable? Is that an example of the exploitation of this system?
We certainly don't want to go down that route. This is Dignity in Dying's position of 3 absolute red lines. You have to be terminally ill. In other words, by a doctor, you've got 6 months or less to live. It has to be of your own free will, and it has to be mentally competent. Now, Mark is absolutely right. There are different systems elsewhere in the world, in Canada, in Belgium, but we don't want to do that. You know, just because, for instance, they drive on the right-hand side of the road in Europe doesn't mean to say we have to. We do what we want. We are British. This is a British Parliament, British values, British MPs. And actually, what we're going to have is a red line only for those who are terminally ill. So we're not killing off or letting people die who who aren't already dying. This is only for those who are actually about to say goodbye to life, but want to do it in a more gentle way. And by the way, this isn't a leap into the dark, because we're going to follow the model which is almost exactly the same as what we're proposing here in Britain, and that's in Oregon. And the great thing about Oregon is they've been doing this for 25 years. In other words, we've got a quarter of a century of records and experience of how the system works and how it works well. So this is for British MPs, and we'll decide what the best thing is. And we want to be really, really careful, which is why it's only for those who are terminally ill. We're not going to go down other routes, so don't quote Belgium or Canada. They can do what they want. This is Britain. We'll do it according to what British people want.
Jonathan, what about those 58 British MPs who are already lobbying to go further, who are supported by Humanists UK, My Death, My Decision, your fellow campaigning organisations, who do not want to limit it where you do? You have your three red lines, but they are incoherent. And like I said, British MPs are calling to go further. And will you really campaign against that, or will you just
Jonathan,
step back?
let me ask Jonathan that specific point. Do you trust, say, the Labour government or any potential future government to just stick within the red lines that you prescribed, or does this open a gateway for exploitation?
No, there are obviously people who want to not have assisted dying, and there are obviously people who want to go even further. But Dignity in Dying's position is very clear: only the terminally ill. And by the way, this isn't a Labour issue, because we've got people like Rishi Sunak, who said he would make parliamentary time for it if he'd stayed on as Prime Minister. The leading lights are actually people like Andrew Mitchell, Kit Malthouse, both Conservatives, or Christine Jardine, who's a Lib Dem. This is a cross-party issue, which is, by the way, why it's being made a conscience, a private member's bill. So it's a conscience vote, not political at all. And yes, I do trust the MPs to say this is a red line. And by the way, that's what's so important, because you can't have legislation that's sort of wishy-washy and can't say, well, you can drive on the left or the right-hand side of the road, it's up to you. No, we have to have rules and regulations to protect people, and that's why terminally ill is a very clear distinction that we were going to keep to. And if anyone wants to do, like Mark says, to extend it, the answer is no. This is only terminally ill, and the law has to be very precise.
Mark, so what are your fears about the way in which these MPs that you've already mentioned might be able to extend this, might be able to change it? Would it be possible, and would you be satisfied with the kind of red lines locked into law as Jonathan is describing? Would that satisfy you?
No, it wouldn't, because we've seen everywhere else, or almost everywhere else, that these laws do extend. And I think Jonathan is just being naive, or possibly disingenuous, by saying that, it's not going to go further because we're British, despite the fact that British MPs are calling it to go further. And he can't really come back on the question about, where was his compassion, choice and dignity for Paul Lamb and people like him? He has to just say, sorry, my compassion is limited, your choice is limited, your dignity must be limited. And everywhere, like in Canada, people do say you can't just draw those lines there. Oregon is an outlier. It's very unusual that Oregon has not significantly changed its law. And you can ask for Oregon and you can get Canada, and you cannot necessarily stop that. MPs at committee stage could very easily amend the law that is being proposed. You can bring other things. Somebody could bring a judicial review to say, this is discriminatory against me as a disabled person. I want assisted dying as well. Once you've cracked open that door, there's no way that you can really row back from it. The current law is the safeguard. And we've heard Wes Streeting, the current health secretary, who is sympathetic to the arguments that Jonathan brings. But he said, do you know what, when I see the brokenness in the NHS, I'm really, really worried about what that might mean when you've got an NHS that's under pressure. You can't give the excellent palliative care necessarily that you should be able to give. And of course, that's going to put people under pressure. Even in Oregon, around half of the people who access Jonathan's ideal law in Oregon say they do it because they feel a burden on their caregivers. And I don't want to be in a situation where people are choosing death because they feel a burden. It's much better for us to say, I know life is difficult, death can be difficult, but we will care for you. We will give you dignity by the way we care for you.
Well, you've outlined your position very, very clearly, but you have also accused Jonathan Remain of having a lacking compassion, which I feel is a personal
limiting.
allegation.
He's limiting his compassion.
Can I ask you about that, Jonathan? Do you want to respond directly to that?
Yeah, I mean, Mark's been talking about Jonathan's law and Jonathan's this. It's not me. I'm actually perfectly healthy, and I hope to carry on to my last breath. I'm really actually concerned about the thousands and thousands of people who are dying badly. Look, all of us want to live as good a life as possible. Why shouldn't we have as good a death as possible? You know, I saw someone called Doris the other day, well, about 2 or 3 months ago in a hospice, being looked after superbly. But she said to me, you know, every night I pray to God that I won't wake up in the morning, and every morning I'm disappointed. It's those people I want to help. It's those people I want to give the option, not force them either way, but give them the option. I think they have a right to that option, as do GB News viewers.
Because I think it's possible, isn't it, Mark Pickering, to see this from both sides. Actually, both sides of the argument are coming at it from a position of compassion, but they have a different perspective on what is best for the patients. Can you envisage any situation where you would see assisted dying as being the appropriate course of action?
I mean, I know I've pushed Jonathan quite hard because that's what we have to do here. But I think, yes, of course, I have sympathy for people on Jonathan's side, whether it's campaigners or whether it's individuals. You know, nobody wants to suffer unnecessarily. And of course, we have fears about what would happen. It's essential that we get the broken system that doesn't give us enough palliative care when we need it. And that really does deal with the vast majority of these calls for bad deaths and experiences of bad deaths, because I've worked in a hospice and I've seen people coming in from hospital saying, "Doctor, just let me die." And within a few days, they're not asking that anymore when you really deal with their symptoms. Yes, there will always be a small number of people who still want that, but we must remember that a small number of people who, you know, shouldn't necessarily change the law to make other people vulnerable. Many people, you know, like if ethnic minorities, people with English as a second language, many people, like many of the constituents in Kim Ledbetter's constituency, you know, many Muslims, many others, many Hindus, many people from the Indian subcontinent, for instance, they're not necessarily calling out for it. I have colleagues work in East London, they have lots of ethnic minority patients. Nobody's saying to them, you know, please let me die, but they're saying, no, please don't refer me to that hospice because I think they might want to kill me there. You know, there's so much fear on the other side from people who don't really understand what end-of-life care is all about.
OK, and Jonathan, I just want to bring you in finally on that point. And, you know, this notion of regret, this notion of when people are in terrible pain, in that moment, they might feel that this is the only possible solution. And they might later find that that it does resolve itself. And then a terrible mistake might have been made. Is that something you've considered?
Very much so, and that's why we have this red line of them being terminally ill. So they're not having a depression in their 40s. They're not having a bad result of a heart attack or some cancer that can be cured in their 60s or 70s. These are people who are dying of inoperable cancer, or they can no longer move because they've got Parkinson, or they're slowly choking to death with motor neuron disease. These are hard cases, and I'm giving people options, whereas the opponents are saying, no, you can't have that option. I think that's slightly more compassionate, is it not, to give people the option of which way they want to choose how to end their life. Saying, no, there's only one way, that, I think, is rather cruel. And actually, I think, if to be honest, nothing personal here, Mark, I think it's a bit arrogant to say, I don't like this, and therefore I'm not going to let you like this either. Let's give people choice how to end their own lives.
Why didn't you give Paul Lamb his choice when he asked for it? Paralysed for 30 years, you said, no, we're not going to support a law that would help you.
And argue against it. You're either going to have red lines and be safe, or you have a free-for-all. I don't want a free-for-all, do you?
OK, well, I do appreciate you both coming on to discuss this very sensitive issue, but I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. Thank you both ever so much, Jonathan Remain and Mark Pickering. OK, well, next on Free Speech Nation, do join us after the break. We'll have our social sensations, and we'll also have some unfiltered dilemmas you've emailed in with all your problems, and we will solve them. Well, we'll try to solve them. So please don't go anywhere.
Good evening and welcome to your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Through this evening, largely dry across the eastern half of the country, but we will have rain arriving from the west and it'll be turning milder as well. So ridge of high pressure at first, fairly settled conditions, but we do have this area of rain and this frontal system out towards the west with southerly winds developing through the end of Sunday. So fairly patchy rain across the far north, but across the far southwest, Wales, Devon and Cornwall, heavy rain and quite strong winds developing as we head through this evening, quite blustery across the southern half of the UK, and that frontal system slowly moving its way eastwards. Milder for all, particularly across the southwest, but even parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland a touch higher, although there still will be a few isolated frost patches in rural spots. Back to the southern half of the UK though, so quite a damp start. It could be quite difficult driving conditions through the morning rush hour with some spray on the road. But further north, it'll start to become a bit drier and brighter. Certainly places such as Northern Ireland and parts of northeast and Scotland. It'll be a fairly dry, bright and crisp start to the day on Monday. Further west across the Western Isles, still lingering on underneath that band of rain and with those stronger winds coming from that southerly direction. Through the rest of Monday, though, that front system does move off in towards the North Sea and it does become drier, particularly across western parts through the rest of Monday. Further north, there's particularly some decent sunshine across Northern Ireland and Scotland, but further south, it's quite stubbornly holding on to that cloud. So mild temperatures, but still fairly cool. Temperatures again into the double figures across Scotland and some bright sunshine. Tuesday will be starting generally cloudier for much of the UK, and notice these winds will be picking up as well. So particularly parts of Scotland will notice a more blustery feel on Tuesday, and then we begin to see some areas of showers moving in from the west. So largely dry on Tuesday, showers spreading in on the west on Wednesday, but it will be a touch drier for most on Thursday. That's all from me. Bye for now.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date. Or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation, and I'm absolutely delighted to say that, as usual, I have David Oldroyd Bolt here to discuss his weekly roundup of the arts and culture. David, welcome to the show. So what have you been doing this week? What's been happening?
Well, first thing was a production of Tchaikovsky's opera Eugen Onegin at the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden, which I saw last week and has one performance left tomorrow night. There are tickets left. It was a supremely good production. The director is the American Ted Huffman, so it's quite sparse staging,
yes,
but not... it doesn't get in the way. Really excellent performance, I want to single out, of Olga by this young mezzo-soprano Avery Amaro. Gordon Bintner, a very, very good Eugen Onegin. And a particularly fine performance from the principal ballerina Lauren Bridle. The opera has, along with most of Tchaikovsky's operas, a balletic scene because it was at the time necessary for performance both in Russia and in France to have a balletic scene. And I can't remember, I'm afraid, who the producer is of this balletic scene, but the elegance with which it is done, the mixture of classical ballet with a very modernistic stage, and I thought worked exceptionally well.
Fantastic.
And the conductor is the Hungarian Henrik Nanashi.
And what about the cost? If people because a lot of people are scared. I think it's prohibitive.
Yeah, well, I've just looked. The cheapest ticket available is £53, which I think is pretty good for Covent Garden, with a full view seat. These are not restricted view. And if you're feeling like you want to take your wife or husband out for an anniversary, you can have a stall seat for £250, which I'm reliably informed is still less than a Premiership football ticket.
Exactly, and you pay a lot more for Les Miserables than £53.
Yes, for a great deal less artistically.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. The same tune many, many times. Anyway, let's not talk about that. What else have you been doing this week?
Well, one thing to look forward to on Tuesday night at St George's, Hanover Square in Mayfair. is a performance by Chiara Hendrick and Opera Settecento, which I didn't know about until it was brought to my attention. The first English singer in the 18th century to sing the big then Italian and German roles was a woman called Jane Barbier, who had a rather rackety life. She invested in the South Sea bubble. She ran off with a man and then came back unmarried, but with a child in tow, apparently.
Not the done thing.
No, made a great deal of money, was a great celebrity, worked very closely with Handel, which is why it's being done at St George's, Hanover Square. He lived on Brook Street down the road and worshipped there. The production is being done throughout the rest of the year, but this was just something I thought I'd drop in there for anyone in London on Tuesday night at 7 o'clock, St George's, Hanover Square.
Fantastic. And you've also been reading a book?
Well, yes. The Professor of History at Buckingham University and former Daily Telegraph journalist and historian Professor Simon Heffer has a new book out. This is his third in his series on the English language. And this one, called Scarcely English, follows on from Simply English and Strictly English.
Yes.
So Simon, as anyone who reads his books will know, is a master of the language and has, I think, a really sensible view on what the English language is and is becoming, which is that there is such a thing as standard British English, and everybody should learn it, should be taught it, indeed, and then learn it. Because if you can't communicate clearly, if you can't communicate lucidly, your chances in life are severely limited. And one of his arguments in putting these books out every few years is that those people who say, well, there is no such thing as standard English, it's always a language in flux, are the people who, conversely and rather hypocritically, can use it beautifully and have advanced themselves through that.
That's a very interesting point. Could you just hold the book up again so we can see that? Scarcely English by Simon Heffer. I mean, a lot of people have suggested that to have a mastery of the English language in a formal condition is a kind of elitism, but I would have thought it's the opposite, insofar as if everyone is educated to the same standard in terms of standard English, then we all have the same advantages and the same potential.
Well, precisely, it gives a level playing field. I would say it is a form of elitism in that we have this language, which is the most extraordinary, the most flexible, the most linguistically rich, the most... if you look at, for instance, the size of the English language's vocabulary, it's about 1 million words. Compare it with French, which is about 100,000. We have this exceptional language, and we should all have the right to be able to use it. And, again, Heffer goes through and says, you know, these are the things that differentiate British English from American English. They're different languages. It would be nice if we retained our own usage. For instance, he uses railway station rather than train station, which I think has a certain romanticism to it. You think of a railway, you think of steam trains trundling through the Malvern Hills. You think of a train station, you think of Grand Central or somewhere like that. It evokes a different sort of country. But his overriding point is that if you are able, through the use of books like this and through good teaching, to master the English language, you will go much farther in life, people will take you more seriously, and generally your chances of being understood will be greater.
Now, I was thinking about this when there was a story a couple of years ago about English teachers accepting text speak in English essays and in examinations, even to the extent that you would put the number 242.
Yeah.
And I just thought, you know, you are disadvantaging these pupils. They are less likely to be employed later on. It's all very well saying this will help you pass the exam, but it doesn't instill in them the necessary skills that will endear them to employers.
No, not at all. And it's indeed a retrenchment. Why are we, after, what, let's say 2,000 years of this language developing and with various additions from other languages, why have we decided to take a step backwards instead of trying to make it yet greater and greater and greater? Why are we saying you can revert to some kind of childish semi-dialect? I think it's idiotic.
So Simon Heffer isn't saying that the language doesn't evolve or that it shouldn't?
Well, no. In fact, in the introduction, he goes out of his way in 3 paragraphs to say that that would be a ludicrous assertion and it would hamper his argument from being taken in any way seriously. Language does evolve. It does change. We have accretions. We have losses. That is the nature of it. What he's arguing against is the purposeful degradation of the language and this idiotic idea, and I think it is idiotic, that's why I keep saying it. It's truly also, I think, anti-progress idea that you can just do whatever you want with a language and that somehow people will understand you.
Yes.
Which is never going to be the case.
And it's also slightly snobbish, isn't it? Sort of saying that there are a certain class of pupil who just will never get
Well, yes, it's that awful argument of not for the likes of you.
Yes.
The idea that somebody from a sink estate should not be taught the greatest, when in fact I would say the opposite is the case. If you're going to Eton, then you're going to be surrounded by people speaking the most perfect and beautiful English imaginable. If you don't have that advantage, then it's even more the case that the education system and the official systems of the use of English ought to provide you with that. yet.
Well, given the subject, I assume it's a well-written book. Is it an accessible book? Is it?
It is, and it's very, very funny.
Yes.
As, again, anybody who knows Simon's writing will know, he's a witty, incisive writer. He takes no prisoners, and so there are examples given of good writers doing things badly throughout, both in English and American English. It's relatively short. I read it now, so it should take most people half an hour. I'm a slow reader.
Fantastic. And it's called Scarcely English.
It is called Scarcely English by Simon Heffer, and it's out in all good bookshops and most bad ones.
Thank you very much, David Oldroyd-Bolt.
Thank you.
And next on Free Speech Nation, we're going to be talking about social sensations. What's been going viral this week on social media? So please don't go anywhere.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark meets at My Take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring. Not on my watch. I just won't have it. Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
We are now delighted to be joined by comedian and my beautiful friend, Francine Lewis, who's here to share with us her upcoming book, The Last Laugh, and an exciting competition in collaboration with none other than that mean Simon Cowell. Francine,
he's not so mean anymore.
Oh, is he not?
He's not. And do you know what?
Since having a child, is it maybe?
Definitely. It's really weird because I really liked Simon. He was nasty. I just found that, I don't know, quite sexy. Now he's way too nice. Way too nice.
That's what they say, isn't it? You get all the nice guys say, I never get any luck with women. And they always say I'm too nice.
Do you know what? The truth is, I've always thought Simon was lovely. He's such a nice guy. Like, when I was doing Britain's Got Talent, I was very, very excited, you know, to meet Simon again because it was the second time I'd actually met him. And I always thought he was such a charming, lovely man.
Of course, you are more recently well known for BGT and your impressions and whatnot.
Do you know what? I do watch a lot of reality TV, a lot of that sort of stuff.
What do you watch?
I love Towie, whenever Love Island's on. Seriously, honeys, 100% definitely. You got to watch Essie. It's all about Towie, love it, seriously. So I'm always doing, you know, whatever the new reality shows are.
Another favourite is Katie Price, and we've got a video, I think we've got a selfie video of us doing...
Have we?
Yeah, we have, from
I'm showing
years ago.
Tatiana to Katie Price, which she does amazingly. Come on, Tatiana, let's...
I don't.
Tatiana!
Katie, there's a mixture between Katie Price and Tatiana.
What do you think? I love when people take me off. It shows what a big star I am.
It's the lick of the lips.
The People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Emily Carver. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. It's time for Social Sensations. That's the part of the show where we look at what's been going viral this week on social media. And first up, we have this video.
Why was it important for you to come to the protest today? I came with Queers for Palestine. I'm a trans, non-binary person. I believe we're not free until everyone's free. Queer liberation, queer people live in Palestine. There's pinkwashing going on and people are trying to tell queer people that they can't be part of what's going on in Palestine, and I just want to be here for queer Palestinians and for every Palestinian, because what's happening is disgusting.
Well, I support her right, and I think she should go to Gaza and make that point.
Yeah.
I think so, you know...
I agree. I'd like to see that documentary, yeah. Who will think of the many queers in Palestine I mean, I totally support this. I'm a GB News presenter who's against GB News. I want it to be shut down. That's basically her position. It's the queers it's the impossible position.
I mean, she has a point that there are gay people in Palestine, but they tend to keep it to themselves.
And are they queers, though? Because that's not just meaning you're gay. That's like you identify with a certain set of political values. It seems to be now, right?
I mean, they're not non-binary, let's put it that way.
Right.
You know,
they're very binary over in Palestine.
There would just be gay people in Palestine who, you know, because of the oppression, have to keep it to themselves. And it does seem odd, doesn't it? Because, I mean, I saw an image go viral of 2 Queers for Palestine protesters topless, with Queers for Palestine written on their breasts.
Classic.
And I think that, again, wouldn't go down well in an Arab state.
Well, I don't know if it's been tried recently.
No,
Andrew,
maybe they've
so
changed.
Perhaps they should.
Maybe they've changed. They go to
and
Iran, give that a go.
experiment. Yes.
I'm sure the Ayatollah would have no issue with that whatsoever. He would support it. He would probably strip off himself, get involved.
Isn't it amazing? It always makes me think I didn't have social media at that age, and what a gift that is.
I know. I sort of feel for these kids, because they're saying really obviously ridiculous and stupid things, but it's all recorded. It's there for posterity. I bet in 5 years' time they'll think, oh, what the hell was I doing?
Yeah, well, I said earlier that students are stupid. That was apparently controversial.
No,
you chastised me. But
I didn't chastise you.
Everyone now is admitting I was right.
Well, except for Greta Thunberg, who has got older, is now an adult, and she's still saying the stupid thing.
Although she's moving on, isn't she? Before she was more climate-y, now she's more Palestine-y.
Yes.
She'll move on again.
It'll be whatever's fashionable at any given time, clearly. OK, let's move up. We've got this video.
It's mid-October. It's mushroom time. Now, look, people don't seem to want to go out foraging anymore, but I really do. Have a look at these little monkeys. That is magnificent. Now, look, if you don't know what you're picking, be careful, but you can tell a mushroom by how easily it peels, by how it smells. This is going to be my lunch.
Did that really go viral? I'm not so sure. Nigel foraging for mushrooms.
That's huge online.
Is it a huge thing?
The kids, Andrew, are sharing
they
that.
love it.
Yeah.
What type of mushroom is it?
I don't know. I don't know. You're asking the wrong guy. I'm not an expert on mushrooms.
Is it a hallucinogen?
Everything, probably. Everything, judging by his sunglasses. Did you see his look with those sunglasses? He looked like a sort of retired gangster that's gone on to live on a farm. Could be played by, like, Ray Winstone or Michael Caine in a film. He's just trying to get on with the farm, but he gets sucked back in for one last job. Yeah. But everything Farage does kind of works when he's in that Toad Hall kind of mode, right? When he's wearing that thing and he's out in the...
Yeah.
It just works because it's kind of like... It just reminds us of an old England that's almost lost unless Farage wins.
And apparently he is really big on TikTok. The youths
Oh, yeah, because what Nick's not seeing in that is that that's a dog whistle to the people that do go foraging for mushrooms in a more recreational, kind of less...
Oh, the old dog whistle. OK. There we go.
It's the first one I haven't heard.
Yeah. Anyway, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. But I really appreciate you coming along, our audience, I mean, to Free Speech Nation this week. And but thank you also, of course, to my wonderful panel. We have Cressida Wetton here and Nick Dixon. And to all of my brilliant guests that you've seen this evening. I should say that Free Speech Nation will be recorded live at the Battle of Ideas next week. So if you don't have a ticket already, please do get it. We're going to be recording that on the Saturday. But it's a brilliant weekend. It's full of debates, hundreds of international guests, a fantastic weekend devoted to free speech. And I will be there. If that's not an incentive, I don't know what is. By the way, if you would like to join us in the studio at any future show, you can be part of this wonderful studio audience. It's dead easy. Just go to sroaudiences.com. That web address is there on the screen right now. Just apply there, then you can come along, you can join the audience, you can chat with us, you can have the free wine and the free beer. There are soft drinks available too for the Puritans, and we've also got various snacks and things like that, so do come along. Stay tuned, because the brilliant Mark Dolan tonight is coming up in just one moment. And also, I have to plug it, don't forget, Headliners is on every night at 11 o'clock. Comedians taking you through the next day's major news stories. Thanks for watching Free Speech Nation. I'll see you again next week.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening and welcome to your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Through this evening, largely dry across the eastern half of the country, but we will have rain arriving from the west and it'll be turning milder as well. So ridge of high pressure at first, fairly settled conditions, but we do have this area of rain and this frontal system out towards the west with southerly winds developing through the end of Sunday. So fairly patchy rain across the far north, but across the far southwest, Wales, Devon and Cornwall, heavy rain and quite strong winds developing as we head through this evening, quite blustery across the southern half of the UK, and that frontal system slowly moving its way eastwards. Milder for all, particularly across the southwest, but even parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland a touch higher, although there still will be a few isolated frost patches in rural spots. Back to the southern half of the UK though, so quite a damp start. It could be quite difficult driving conditions through the morning rush hour with some spray on the road. But further north, it'll start to become a bit drier and brighter, certainly for places such as Northern Ireland and parts of North East and Scotland. It'll be a fairly dry, bright and crisp start to the day on Monday. Further west, across the Western Isles, still lingering on underneath that band of rain and with those stronger winds coming from that southerly direction. Through the rest of Monday, though, that front system does move off in towards the North Sea and it does become drier, particularly across western parts through the rest of Monday. Further north, there's particularly some decent sunshine across Northern Ireland and Scotland, but further south, it's quite stubbornly holding onto that cloud. So mild temperatures, but still fairly cool. Temperatures again into the double figures across Scotland and some bright sunshine. Tuesday will be starting generally cloudier for much of the UK, and notice these winds will be picking up as well. So particularly parts of Scotland will notice a more blustery feel on Tuesday, and then we begin to see some areas of showers moving in from the west. So largely dry on Tuesday, showers spreading in on the west on Wednesday, but it will be a touch drier for most on Thursday. That's all from me. Bye for now.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on G.
We love making our audience big cash winners, and you really could be next with £36,000 tax-free cash in your bank.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Busy one tonight. It is 9 o'clock on television, on radio and online in the United Kingdom and across the world. This is Mark Dolan Tonight. In my big opinion, can Britain survive another 100 days of this Labour government? I'll be giving my verdict in just a couple of minutes. An extraordinary clip has emerged of opera singer Wyn Evans touching his Strictly dance partner inappropriately. They've said it's a joke. But is there more to this story than meets the eye? Plus, the Tory leadership race turns nasty as the final two candidates take the gloves off. I'll get reaction from a current Conservative MP, a former Tory MP, and a top Tory insider. And tonight, my top pundits. Head of Communications at the Popular Conservatives, Annunziata Rees-Mogg, former Tory MP Neil Parish and former Labour Special Advisor Paul Richards. Two hours of big opinion, big debate and big entertainment. Something very special for you. Something very, very special for you at 10 o'clock. Ian Hislop on the BBC, on Have I Got News For You, has launched an extraordinary attack on GB News. So I'll be dealing with the BBC and Hislop and Have I Got News For You in no uncertain terms in a special Take at 10. That's in an hour. You won't want to miss it. Lots to get through, but first, the news headlines and Katie Bowen.
Mark, thank you, and a very good evening to you. It's just gone 9 o'clock. These are your latest headlines from the GB newsroom. Developing tonight in the Middle East, Hezbollah has said it launched a drone attack on a military base in northern Israel earlier, with Israeli medics reporting that around 60 people have been injured in the attack on the Golani Brigade camp. The IDF has yet to confirm the number of casualties. It comes as this afternoon Israeli military said that one of its tanks entered a UN post in southern Lebanon while attempting to evacuate injured soldiers. United Nations personnel said that 15 peacekeepers were injured in what the UN called a shocking violation. UN Chief